Welcome, we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we recommend this book to all Christianish believers out there in Religiousville. Christianish, what if we're not really following Jesus at all? By author Mark Steele, author of Flashbang and Half-Life Diary. Contents page. In everyday life, when one chooses to acknowledge another, it is the equivalent of gesturing toward that person as if to point out which end of the compass is north. Not so in a book. In a book, to acknowledge someone is to sum up in very few words the substantial importance said individual has played in the book writer's life. To this end, there are a great number of individuals the author could acknowledge for various and sundry reasons, though he decided not to. He could, for instance, acknowledge his wife, Casey, for her undying love and support, as well as her willingness to suppress the urge to insert his hand into a scalding hot George Foreman grill each time he drove a lengthier path to a destination than the path she would have chosen. The author could have acknowledged his father, whom he would call Dad, for allowing him to abandon baseball at an early age, enough to kickstart his writing career. He could have thanked him for encouraging him to write those spec moonlighting episodes while he bled tears for fears from his room. He could acknowledge his mum, who gave blood, sweat and tears so that he could have a Christian education, thanking her especially for bringing some rationale and perspective to said curriculum so that the schooling was not skewed to tri-state regional competitions levels. He could acknowledge his children, Morgan, Jackson, David and brand spanking new baby David, though it's a bit too early for spankings, simply because he loves him and their foibles provide great literary material. He could acknowledge his pastor, Roger Nix, for keeping him sane. He could acknowledge his business partner, Kevin Anderson, and the entire Steelhouse team for making art as business a joy. He could have acknowledged his brothers and brother-in-law for deflating his sometimes swelled head. He could acknowledge Eric Lee for the amazing illustrations that he deciphered out of his chicken scratch, or his editor Andre Christian for reminding him to write up some acknowledgements. Let's face it, the author could acknowledge some of everyone's of importance, significance or influence in his life, but he wouldn't. And he won't. Instead, he acknowledged them for they all drove him every single day to ditch the ish and instead genuinely follow Jesus Christ. He also here acknowledges Jesus Christ. Mark Steele, January 2009-ish. He writes, I am Christianish. At approximately 3 o'clock on an otherwise uneventful afternoon, random disaster landed in his living room, scaring his wife's Afghan Pinchka permanently. In a collision of arbitrary calamity, the sort of incident one reads about in a James Frey memoir but does not believe. His wife accidentally cut off the dog's tongue with a pair of grooming scissors. Grooming scissors. The dog was named Scout in honour of the little girl in To Kill a Mockingbird, though he is neither a girl nor currently inside any fancy books. It must first be respectfully noted that the dog's tongue is his talent. It is his method of showing affection, and he wields it with a flourish like the caricature artist on the boardwalk waves pastel chalk before sketching your oversized head on the body of a minuscule muscle man. Scout's lick was his love. It was all he really knew how to do. That tongue was his Sistine Chapel. Of all the human beings who could have fathomably been the bearer of the specific catastrophic misstep towards his dog, a cutlery juggler, a careless bolster whittler, the lady who runs the paper shooter at Kinko's, the least likely and worst emotional choice is the human who actually did the deed. That would be the author's wife, Casey. The reason Casey is the worst choice that is the cause of this particular accident is because there is not a human soul on the planet who loves the dog more. In fact, the atrocity occurred during an act of kind-hearted affection. Casey was grooming Scout with great precision and detail, putting him up because, after all, he is named after a girl. He was only slightly distracted by the fact that her back was aching. She was about to leave town for 5 days, and she had just received word that a loved one had passed away. Still, she forged ahead with the necessary grooming. She took a clump of his doggy hair between the blades, and then, just as he squeezed, Scout whipped his face around, jabbing his tongue in the middle of the shears themselves. Shink. The rest, as you would imagine, was gross. Scout was rushed to the vet, where the angry asked how this could have happened. I don't know how this happened. The dog was licking an envelope while I accidentally slipped it in the paper shredder. What do you think happened? The vet quickly gave him 10 stitches. 10. The author reiterates this because the vet also reiterated this, making sure they fully understood that Scout was a tiny dog, and that he should have never been subjected to such terror. 10 stitches, the vet insisted. Were 10 stitches too many? He chewed them all out overnight. The determination was made in the morning that Scout would need to have the dangling participle removed altogether. The tongue-ectomy was performed. A fourth of his slobbering member was omitted. From then on he yelped with a lisp. It's a good thing the author's name is Mark. So Casey felt horrible, and she shouldn't have, because it wasn't her fault. It was just the rotten way everything sort of fell together in light of the chaos that was going on around her, mixed with the flitting nature of the dog. But that doesn't change the fact that it did indeed happen. It doesn't change the fact that Scout's tongue is now gone for good. The author understood Casey's guilt and grief because he has also played a part in someone's catastrophe. Several someones, in fact. He has played a part in many needful things being removed. The scissors he wielded were not tangible. They were different things in different seasons of his life. The cutlery of his inconsistent ways, his sarcastic tongue, and his resistance to maturity. In too many moments when he knew full well that someone else was watching, he selected selfishness to make decisions in a manner that would benefit himself most of all. He tossed about his acidic words like Agent Orange on a rice field. He snubbed his nose at others whose sin or failure was simply a nuanced variation of his own. He aimed for godliness as an idea, but was quick to snag the do-over of grace when his intentions proved faulty. He judged, he condemned, and he thought it was okay because the people of the church were still impressed with him. But the world was watching. Funny, he always thought his attempts at godliness wouldn't make all that much difference to the world. In light of the mammoth sunshine of Christ, he was at best a tiny blip of a moon, miniature and reflective, barely a dust mite in light of that massive star. Unfortunately, that tiny moon is capable of blocking out the lights of the sun almost entirely. It's called an eclipse, and it is what happens when the vastly smaller moon is hovering too close to the observer and in front of the sunlight. Yes, most nights we moons reflect the light, claiming its grandeur as their own, but occasionally through a sudden collision of random happenstance we make the sun seem to completely disappear. This should come as no surprise to the author, because his own faith journey was marred by a number of moons blotting out the light. One religious leader in particular had many profound God ideas that transformed him, but he also used to ridicule his weight on a regular basis. He was joking, of course, but due to his ongoing neurosis regarding weight gain, the author was never able to hear any truth out of his lips past the moons of that repeated statement. This was unfortunate, as he had some very good things to say. This knee-jerk reaction to criticism and insults developed a defence mechanism inside of the author. Ironically, this defence was his writ. If he could insult and get a laugh before the other person, then he never had to be called fat or weak or worthless again. So he manufactured the very same set of scissors that had cut him. Kindness had been ripped from his person and replaced with something akin to coarseness, a leathery coating of intellect and cleverness that would hide the ugly fear and mask it with uglier pride. This was the author's weapon, and he daily saved himself by harming everyone. else. The root of the problem and the real damage is that while he lived in this dysfunction, he called himself Christian. He never really liked the name Christian. He was told it meant little Christ. It actually meant a slave to Christ, because it's a loan word from the Greeks by the Romans. And as a 13-year-old, that sounded at best presumptuous, and at its basis freakishly cocky beyond all measure. In all honesty, the author didn't want it to be a little Christ. It seemed both insulting to God and too much pressure for him. He didn't want to be a souvenir of Jesus. He didn't want to be his homeboy, a bobblehead version you buy at the gas station that cheapens the real deal. He wanted instead to be a follower of Christ. He'd heard that phrase bandied about, and he thought it sounded accurate and cool. He would vastly prefer to be an arrow pointing to the great question rather than having someone mistake him for the answer. His take on the matter was unfortunate because the truth actually lay somewhere in between. No, the author did not believe Jesus desired for him to be mistaken for him. He did not intend for his singular actions to be the sole picture of who he truly is. But he did and does fully urge the author to pursue being one of the many earth pictures that cause people to see him at work in their lives. This was a risky move for God. By making each and every one of us who calls himself Christian an active parable of his love, he is hazarding the chance that some, or even one of us, won't take that symbolism very seriously. Somehow, in the scheme of the passage of time, we have placed the issue of example of Jesus into the hands of evangelical religion as a whole, living as if together somebody's got everything covered. But this is not reality. Reality beckons a weak link theory that even a singular one who calls himself a little Jesus and yet lives the opposite damages the whole caboodle, and in fact damns the world that is watching. In a crude analogy, we're advertising Coca-Cola by saying it tastes like turpentine, and then growing antagonistic towards those that are willing to take a swig. And yet God took the risk anyway, because he knows that the other end of the spectrum is also true. As much as it damages the reputation of Christ for those who call themselves Christians to live the antithesis of his teachings, on the flip side it makes quite a statement when a flawed human makes a right decision with nothing in it for himself other than taking a stand for Christ. It is the single most tangible way to prove the intangible. This was God's plan, that when the world looks at each of us, they would not simply see a follower of him. In some miraculous and unexplained way, God knows that when the world stares at a flawed human, who someone occasionally chooses holy and unhuman actions, they see a picture of Jesus. It is one true arrow that God's grace allows us each to be, a conduit for a relationship between someone else and God. This is why he took the risk. This is why he took the risk on the author. But something happened along the way. Somewhere along the road of offence and defence, the author stopped being a little Christ and instead began filling out the application that he had labelled Christian. It was not a definition based on the actual namesake, but rather on those who frequent the clubhouse. And in the midst of being an American Christian among all the other American Christians, the author stopped truly searching the nuances of who Christ was and is in order to fully grasp what a little Christ might indeed act like. Certainly the author soaked in the Word of God in seasons. He knew the key stories, the greatest hits, the miracles, the Beatitudes, the Passion Week, and whatnot. But he chose not to apply the reality of all the truth in between his words and actions into his own behaviour. He allowed Jesus to seep into his church world, but not his relational world, his romance world, his business world, his creative world, his habits, his mouth. He read his words, he learned his words, but he did not fully belong to him. Because of this, the author became a sort of half-breed. He segregated himself, splitting his soul into two segments, one that would openly serve Jesus and one that would secretly protect himself. He became like people he deemed his kind of godly instead of becoming like Jesus. He pursued Christian success instead of pursuing Christ. He spoke witty insults as commonly as profound prayers, and in the process he called himself a Christian without ever becoming a little Christ at all. He became something else. Not truly Christian, but rather merely Christianish. As a church community, it is time we asked ourselves a startling question. What if we're not really following Jesus at all? Our Christian intention has sharp edges. It has the ability to mould and shape, but also to stab and permanently damage. We have been wagging these blades carelessly for far too long while distracted by some very non-Christ-like habits, behaviours and dysfunctions. Because we are unable to notice our own distraction, we keep on waving our razors, impressed with our own cutlery skills, until we suddenly find ourselves the benefactors of unintentional but irreversible wounds. And no, the author didn't simply refer to wounds made by a few. They are made by us all, by you, by me, by Mark Steele. Yes, we do our best to remedy those wounds, calling our efforts misunderstood and leaning on God's grace in hopes that we can pick up off the floor that which we amputated and use the excuse that we had handed it back. But it's not enough, not even close to enough. The wrong road. How did modern evangelicalism lose its balance? How did modern evangelicalism lose its balance? How did some behaviour fall into an accountability category while other distractions remain unaddressed and therefore socially and religiously acceptable? For the author personally, his efforts have become more centred on how to cope with his own dysfunctional life and less concentrated on what it really means to follow Jesus. He was more than off balance. He was travelling the wrong road completely. And compares it to rollerblading. He's compared it to to roller skating and the difference between Christianish and Christ follower. We have trained ourselves to cope well on a Christianish path, a path where we please the right godly people and don't feel guilt when our failings are seen by the world at large. Yes, our methods work on this path, but it's the wrong path. It's not the approach to Jesus that we are supposed to take, that we are created to take. So we fall into confusion over why life doesn't work and why our faith doesn't feel right, why nothing true is coming from our so-called Christianity. We attempt to fix it by refining our current method, but here's the catch. The method won't work on the right road because it is a method built for the wrong road. We cannot change the dysfunction of our Christian walk by simply trying to become better at the wrong we are already living. We must switch roads. In switching, we must discover the new method of living that truly works on the right road. There is only one way for the author to discover the right way to travel the right road. The way is not a church, the way is not an ideology, the way is not a Christian, the way is Jesus. In the author's path of becoming functional in a dysfunctional faith, he crashed and burned quite often. He became and remained the lukewarm that gets spit out, the vomit to which the dog returns, the goat that was separated from the sheep. He nodded and then verbalised amen at each and every one of those stories, just sticking internally at the target of the moral, never once interpreting that the antagonist might just be himself. He was at risk of becoming the one at the pearly gate whom the very Jesus he thought he was serving says he never knew. He lost the plot altogether. The author lost the plot altogether, grasping at the path toward eternity that fit most nicely into his temporal goals. From Christianist to Christ follower. So the question begs, how does the transformation begin? From Christianish to Christ follower. What is the road and what is the method? It is certainly a painful road, a gravel-laden path that requires going back to the very beginning and digging deep into Jesus' words and actions during the time he walked and breathed on planet Earth. When you look at the New Testament from the Jesus perspective, it breaks down quickly into 11 key components of his history. 1. How he came into the world. 2. How he was tempted. 3. How his enemies responded to him. 4. How he ministered to the common man. 5. How he made his living. 6. How he responded to his enemies. 7. How his friends responded to him. 8. How he loved. 9. How he performed miracles. 10. How he died. 11. How he left. The truth is here, not merely in the verses we have memorized, but in the manner in which the Saviour spent his days. For the author to become the true definition of a Christian, it will require breaking his thoughts down. It would require breaking his thoughts down and being willing to transform his own behaviour into what he discovered. It would require facing the music and then doing something about it. It will require unlearning and baby steps. He had no idea what that sort of experiment would entail, but he was going to find out. He set himself out to find the right road, the functional method, and he made a statement: he will be a Christ follower and leave the stench of Christianish behind for good. Here's meat here as an example, Exhibit A. And he asked questions. Usually ask questions of the reader at the end of each chapter of the book. 1. Have you found your Christian efforts leading to dysfunctional lifestyle patterns? Describe how. 2. Does the idea of attempting to do the right thing when you are actually on the wrong road resonate with you? 3. When you search your motives, do you find that you are trying to please Christ, or do you find instead that you are attempting to earn your Christianity? 4. How does the following comment relate to your life? I segregated myself, splitting my soul into two segments, one that would openly serve Jesus and one that would secretly protect myself. I became like people I deemed my kind of godly instead of becoming like Jesus. I pursued Christian success instead of pursuing Christ. Scandalous. 19 months are all that separate the author's two older sons at the time, Jackson and Charlie. In practically every way, one is the antithesis of the other. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, but smash them together and they fill out the other's weak spots, becoming one practically perfect human being. Of course, the scattered remains that are left would be a bit messy. In other words, they complete one another, either as a right example or as the wrong one. Their choice. Charlie is, at the time, was 7 and Jackson had just turned 9, which means their choices, at least for the time being, might skew a bit ornery. A few months before writing this book, supposedly, he walked upstairs to turn off his daughter Morgan's light for bedtime. It was later than usual and a good hour after the boys had been put to sleep, which means something different for children than it does for pets. They had been told to go right to bed. Unconsciousness isn't really something that can be demanded of a child, but the author, like millions of parents before him, made the attempt anyway. As he opened Morgan's door to check on her, he caught the two boys in the room. They ceased mid-play, frozen, and stared at him, deer in the headlights. They stood in the middle of her bedroom, a clump of Legos squeezed in each fist. They gasped with wide-eyed guilt on their faces for about 3 solid seconds, and then they ran like mad wildfire through the adjoining bathroom. The author heard the scurry of feet on linoleum, followed by the bounce of springs and the flip-flop of covers as they scrambled into bed. Reasoning doesn't enter into the equation all that much at the ages of 7 and 9. For some reason, not only was the rationale to sprint away and dive into bed considered a good idea, but the identical urge to flee the scene hit both brothers at the same time. The author sauntered through the hall to the bedroom, the longer path than the bathroom route by about 11 inches, and creaked open the door. Each was in his own bunk, feigning sleep, and so the cover-up began. Me, or the author. Boys. They attempted to rouse themselves from their faux slumber. What? Huh? Me. Were you out of bed and playing in Morgan's room? A beat, a moment of pause, and then both simultaneously. Boys. No. Certainly I sympathise with the gut instinct of the cover-up. It is a defensive urge of the male, not to mention the mischievous pre-puberty male. In later stages of life, it will be replaced in turn by hormones, rage and injustice, and unnecessary snacking. Throughout his own young journey, the author was on the punishment end of the cover-up multiple times. It felt ironic to finally be on the other side. Me, or the author. No, you were not in Morgan's bedroom? No, you were not in Morgan's bedroom? Sweat trickled down their tiny foreheads. Boys. Nope, nope, nope. Me, or the author. Just now. Just now? Like 15 seconds ago? You were not holding Legos in Morgan's room? Boys, slightly more hesitant than before. No. Me, I paused for dramatic effect. Well, I saw you. Not since the Noachic era have the floodgates burst open so abruptly. The words "I'm sorry" rat-a-tat tattered out of their mouths repeatedly in a fusillade of desperate penance. Me, I know you are sorry, but you lied. You know what the punishment is for lying? I'm fairly certain there was a couple of yes sirs uttered amid all the slobber and snot. Me, go downstairs, you're each going to get one spank. Yes. The author and his wife believe in spanking. Not grab your knees while the back of your eyeballs rap against your brain spanking, but certainly a recognisable sting that serves as a tangible reminder of why the punishable incident was a bad idea. They wanted their kids to have a sensory reinforcement that sin is not such a preferable option. It always astounded the author when parents don't believe in appropriate spankings because the world spanks people every day, especially the people who didn't receive any as a child. Personally, the author would rather feel a short-term sting than the sort of the Internal Revenue Service doles out. Of course, an appropriate spanking is exactly that, just enough to sting, and definitely on the derriere or the bottom. This way, it's padded. That's what we were always told when we got that whack with the strap or the cane for our mischievous wrongdoings. And of course the act is attached to teaching and forgiveness and a walking through of the issue so that it leads to reconciliation, change and love. That's a pretty version. The boys weren't seeing the benefits just yet. Jackson and Charlie had a very different approach to the news of an impending spanking. Charlie just stares, wide-eyed. His brain immediately begins clicking and whirring. Within 50 seconds he orchestrates a mental plan of how best to charm his way through the incident with minimal pain. By a sheer act of will and reasoning through percentages, he determines swiftly that playing the situation down will cause it to end with only a slight portion of hurt to his person. Jackson destroys everything within his wake. Not literally. He doesn't throw things or flour, but within a small 8-inch radius the planet implodes. Jackson takes the news that he will receive one spank the way most react in a house fire. He hugs his favourite belongings close to his body while screaming and rolling on the floor. The author ushered Jackson into the spanking chamber, their bedroom, first as he knew that the 22 solid minutes it would take to actually deliver the one spank would be an epic purgatorial wait, and hence bonus lesson for Charlie. The reason a Jackson spanking can take so long is because they didn't believe in wrestling their kids into the spanking. There has to be the moment of surrender. Charlie can fake surrender like the best of them, but Jackson, not so much. Me, or the author, lean over, son. Jackson, I can't. I need a glass of water first. Me, you can have a glass of water after your spank. It will take 10 seconds. Jackson, I must have a glass of water first. I'm thirsty. Me, you cannot have a glass of water until after your spank. No one tells the father he's going to be put in a position to say these sorts of irrational things. Me, or the author, you're stalling. Let's just get the punishment over with. Jackson, now I have to go to the bathroom. What? Jackson, you can't spank me because I'll have to pee. I have to go to the bathroom first. Me, you can go to the bathroom after I spank you. We would be finished already. Jackson, you'll whack the pee out of me. Me, I promise I won't whack the pee out of you. See? Irrational things. Of course, this is when Jackson moves from delay tactics and transitions into physical blockers. As the author leans over him and pulls back the spank stick, all sorts of appendages start flailing about spastically like Muppet tails, blocking the punishment trajectory. The author has never seen a kid move so fast as he does when he strategizes a spank block. Arm, hand, arch back, arm, foot, hand, fingers, pushing away, arm, hand, double hand, foot, hand, both feet, while arm, hand, arch. The kid is Mr. Miyagi-ing me, or the author. Suddenly Jean-Claude Van Damme, blocking every attempt to close the deal. He won't play football, but this he can do. The author finally settles Jackson down. Me, or the author. Jackson, I'm not going to fight you. You have to decide that you're going to accept the consequences for what you've done. You've fought me so long that now you're going to get, wait for it, me. 2 spanks. Son of a gun. I had no idea what the kid had in him. He began to writhe and weep and gnash his teeth. The author had never seen gnashing, but it's actually very impressive. He believes he may have even utilised sackcloth. The boy just flat out wailed like he was being branded with a hot iron. To the neighbours, it must have sounded like he was stunning him with a police taser. And then Jackson moved away from delaying and blocking to step 3. Blame. Jackson. It's Morgan. She's a liar. She lies all the time. Me. Who are you and what have you done with my child? Jackson. Morgan. Lies. She lies. Moo ha 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 ha. Me. Alright, son. For that now going to receive somewhere between the bedroom layers of a pen, a mushroom cloud was forming its power, readying itself for a self-applied food. Tension built and a roar and a rumble began to build just beneath the crust of the earth. Me. 3 spanks. And this is when Jackson vomited. Seriously, he bathed. He wasn't sick to his stomach or coming down with a virus. The boy got so worked up over 3 spankings that he literally upchucked everywhere. He blew chunks all over the proceedings. As a father, you can't help but debate your own discipline tactics at this point. The author helped him wash up and then cooled him down with a cloth. He began to settle. After a few moments, he addressed him. The author addressed him. Me. Are you okay? Jackson. I told you I needed to go to the bathroom. Against all of Jackson's hopes and dreams, the regurgitation session did not replace any of the punishment, and the author forged ahead with the 3 spanks anyway. The beauty of Jackson is, though he fights you all the way, you know where he stands. When the punishment is over, Jackson is quick to reconcile, huddled and sobbing in his arms, the author's arms. At that moment after the pain, he is truly repentant, and he always comes out the other side changed. Amid all of this excitement, Charlie sat waiting in the hall. 20 solid minutes, hearing the sounds of torrential screams and human retching. He sat, stone, eyes like nickels on a plate of fine china. Needless to say, Charlie walked in and bent over and received his 1 spank in about 6 seconds flat. Immensely accommodating, but alas not nearly as life-changing as Jackson. It's harder to tell whether or not Charlie truly changes, because Charlie knows how to charm. During that same spanking, he sat near Casey, the author's wife, and spoke to her as Jackson's sobs and moans were muffled behind the bedroom door. Charlie, I'm not going to do anything Jackson is doing when I go get my spanking. Casey, you're not? Huh? Charlie, nope, I'm going to walk right in and just get spanked. Casey, that's a good idea, Charlie. Charlie, I do not like it when Daddy spanks me. Casey, I bet you don't. Charlie, I like it when you spank me. This piqued Casey's interest and she hesitated before asking nonchalantly, Casey, oh really? Why? Charlie, because when Daddy spanks me it hurts, but when you spank me it does not. Charlie's gaze finally met Casey's. The realization of the privileged information spilling out of his mouth occurred to him. He stared. Charlie, I probably should not have told you that. Casey smiled pleasantly. Casey, tell you what, son, from now on we'll let Daddy do all your spankings. Charlie sighed. Charlie, yep, I definitely should not have told you that. So there is an inherent difference in the way Jackson deals with disappointment and in the way Charlie deals with it. Yes, Jackson goes off with the deep end, revealing his scars and putting his emotions in front of a microphone, but at least the microphone tells the rest of us what we need to know. Jackson wrestles his flesh to the ground, and he does so in public. That's how we know that transformation is real. The author knows that his repentance is true because he witnessed his internal journey from resistance to acceptance firsthand. Charlie? Well, you don't always know with Charlie. Charlie is good at seeming fine. He keeps his deepest feelings close to his chest. In the rough stuff, you could go a very long time without Charlie allowing anyone to see the rough stuff. The result is an engaging and personable child. Everyone's best friend, though you don't always know what's really going on inside there. Charlie positions and decorates himself instead of getting messy and raw. In the same way that we cannot see Charlie's true repentance and feelings, we, as a Christian culture, disguise the ugly, bury the past, and soak the dirty laundry in perfume. We do it as an effort to put our best foot forward, believing that faking good ministers more than revealing bad. We have an emotional need to seem holier than all the thous we encounter while fitting into the perfect, flawless word of those who side hug us on the way to the sanctuary. We delay, we block, we blame, we cover up. And we somehow believe that this delivers a better impression of what is meant to serve Christ. We believe that seeming the Stepford wife makes us some sort of recruitment tool. But the truth is, we have done more damage to the world's impression of Jesus by feigning inaccurate perfection than we could ever cause by allowing those who don't follow Christ to see us wrestling our sins and flaws to the ground. Scandalous history. Many cite Matthew 5:48, be perfect, therefore as your heavenly Father is perfect, as a reason to make ourselves look good. But that verse doesn't have anything to do with fakery. It is a call instead to spiritual maturity, and maturity owns up to the truth. Others refer to Jesus and how it was His holiness that truly ministered. This of course is true, but we too quickly forget that His holiness ministered most powerfully as it stood side by side with His humanness, and never was humanness more on display than in His birth. Jesus revealed the rough stuff with the very way He first came into the world. It seems to the author that the first sentence in the first telling of the Son of God entering into this world would be glorious and filled with holy hyperbole. Not so. Instead, we get a few pragmatic words, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. This is merely a preamble to the names that follow, names that expose Christ's lineage. The first chapter of Matthew fires the names of Bam, Bam, Bam. So and so was the father of Watcher McCallum, never taking the smallest breath, diving headlong into historic minutiae until Z. Verse 7 delivers the whopper, the first specific detail mankind received about the family Jesus comes from. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Uriah? Wasn't he the guy David had killed? Murdered after David slept with his wife. That guy? Why on earth, out of all the admirable people in Jesus' lineage, and for that matter all the honourable traits of David, why is this bucket of family dirt given the first and greatest mark of attention? A golden opportunity missed. Here the ultimate history book had the option of paving a red carpet lined with paparazzi before Jesus, publicising the elitist line he came from and urging the public down to its knees in awe. This was the proof that Jesus came from the lineage of the favourite king, the man after God's own heart, David. But instead of applauding this fact, chapter 1 in Matthew pauses to remind the reading audience that this great King David, whose line led to the Saviour, this beloved ancestor of Jesus Christ, was a man of great failure and greater scandal. For he had this guy Uriah killed, sent to the battlefront, knowing that he'd be killed, so he could sleep with his wife. And of course he died. So he had his way with his wife, and to him was born a son, Solomon. Instead of applauding this fact, chapter 1 in Matthew pauses to remind the leading audience that this great King David, whose line led to the Saviour, this beloved ancestor of Jesus Christ, was a man of great failure and greater scandal. Matthew started his history book with tabloid fodder. Why? Because just like you and me, Jesus came from a scandalous history. But unlike you and me, Jesus was not afraid for the world to know and remember that scandal. As a matter of fact, he welcomed it. We all come from something scandalous, perhaps those who came before us, perhaps the lives we lived before we lived for Christ, perhaps some aspect of our current lives, but in modern Christianity we have somehow deluded ourselves into believing that priority one is to eradicate this reality. We bury, we pretend, we deny to others and ourselves. And even worse, when the opportunity arises to actually come clean with the soiled spots of our life history, we instead make believe everything is, and always has been, a series of either perfect, fine, or no big deal. And in so doing, we make ourselves into the very fakers we detest. We somehow convince ourselves that this is what Jesus would want: a white, clean facade, a steam-pressed white cotton button-down church shirt. We live the rough stuff, sin, hardships, our scandalous histories, but we keep it silent. We believe it to be a lapse in faith to actually comment on the rough stuff or give it reference. Of that note about David having a son Solomon, of which Joseph, the husband to be of Mary, the human father of Christ, or Jesus the Christ. That's possibly why Christ didn't come from Joseph's seed, right? Intercourse with Mary. Okay, he had nothing to do with it. supposedly Christ was conceived in Mary, the Virgin of the same line. And if you have a look at the Bible, apparently all of Joseph's line, there's a lot of them that followed God, then they turned their back on God, so they were severely punished right the way down to Joseph. So Mary's bloodline of her lineage was actually more righteous, even though a woman and a sinner, her child in the womb supposedly wasn't touched and affected by her sin-filled blood, so forth. This is what we come across years ago. We smile and wave and praise the Lord that everything good is permanent and everything not so good has zero effect on us. We have a terrible habit of skipping the rough stuff. The author does this too, and he doesn't understand why. He couldn't understand why. He looked at the way Jesus entered this world, and he saw very quickly why it was important for him to make mention of Scandalous history. It softened the blow for the shame and disgrace that would accompany him into the world. It was as if Jesus said, I know the manner in which I am born is going to start the rumour mill flowing, so I might as well give it a head start. And what rough stuff it was. A mother pregnant before even married. She was supposed to be stoned by the Jewish law as an adulteress. A father who almost broke off the engagement because he loved her so much. Parents who make their decisions based on angel dreams. A cousin born of the elderly, John the Baptist. A birth in an animal barn in Bethlehem. Adoration from astrologers, the three wise men who are from the east. A birth that prompts the murder of hundreds of other infants. So, Herod killing everyone under 2 in Nazareth, so he would live. Let's just say that if you brought all these needs up during a prayer meeting, the family would be ostracised forever before the first syllable of Amen would be chucked out the door, right? The truth is this: Jesus experienced rough stuff before the age of 5 in ways you and I could never imagine. We consider Christ's sufferings and we picture him at the age of 33, but the beatings go all the way back to the birth canal. The rough stuff. How did we take this life picture and somehow misconstrue it to mean that if we just believed in Jesus, our lives would be wealthy, prosperous and happy? Jesus doesn't promise that. Jesus says that many great things will come to those who follow him, but he also promises a whole lot of lousy, a lot of suffering you get as a Christian for your belief in Christ, or the taunting, the ridicule, the sarcasm, the hate, etc., the accusations, false accusations. It's part of the suffering that one has to take upon oneself. It gets chucked on you, right? Heaped on you. As Christ suffered, so shall you. And here's the key: the lousy isn't rotten, the lousy isn't sin. The focus of your life is not supposed to be dodging lousy, because lousy is life, and lousy is important. It is in the rough stuff where we truly become more and more like Christ, because it is amid the lousy where we experience life on a deeper level. With intense pain comes the opportunity to love more richly. With disappointment comes a push towards selflessness. Neither of those come with pleasant, because pleasant breeds boredom, and boredom is a moist towel with the mung beans of sin sprout. Life following Christ is not supposed to be a ride. It's supposed to be a fight, because there is a specific villain, and if we don't fight, he wins. If our Christianity aims only for pretty and pleasant and happy and rich, the enemy becomes the victor. But there is another just as important reason that we should embrace the rough stuff. Not only because Jesus did and not merely because it is important. We must embrace the rough stuff because for far too long Christians have skipped the rough stuff. We have pretended it does not exist in order to speak into existence a more promising present. But there is a massive dilemma when the Christianish skip the rough stuff. Real life doesn't skip the rough stuff, and those who do not yet follow Jesus know this. Their lives don't skip the rough stuff, and they know good and well that your life doesn't skip it either. So while we as a microcosm of faith have been busy naming and claiming yearning for a better bank account and more pleasant pastures, and ignoring the fact that lousy exists, the world watches, and when they watch they see the truth. Life doesn't skip the rough stuff. We say that our lives do skip the rough stuff, therefore we are liars. Or at absolute best, we don't understand real life at all. The world is looking for Jesus, but they don't know they are looking for Jesus because they believe they are looking for truth. You and I know that truth is Jesus, but them, they do not know that truth is Jesus because you and I are supposed to be Jesus, and you and I couldn't look less like the truth. For decades our focus has been completely skewed. In the 80s our passion was prosperity, never noticing that the only wealth that is important to Jesus is a wealth of love and compassion for those around us. In the 90s we were branded by righteous indignation, and Christianity became a political term. That meant we were anti more things than we were pro. In the new millennium, the postmodern set poured out bitterness and disappointment on the church of our parents, disregarding everything the previous generation built, only to construct the same thing with hipper colour palettes and larger video screens. We still worship what we want our lives to feel like, more than we worship Jesus. We still major on the minors, debating whether the book of Job is literal or parable when we should be out there pulling people out of the rough stuff. We still spend more money on self-help books than we give money to help others. We have become a club, a cliche, a group that is supposed to be a perfect picture of the Father or God Almighty, but instead just acts like a bunch of disgruntled orphans, and we wonder why no one wants to be a Christian. We've got to do some serious redefining of what that word means. The author states here he was in the same boat. Here we are as well. We are guilty as charged for all these crimes. We look back on life and we see more times, and the author saw more times than not, that he wished someone did not know he was a Christian. Why? Because his unkind words and bad behaviour probably did more damage than good to the reputation of Jesus. Yes, this is spilled milk, but the longer we resist cleaning it up, the more sour it will smell. The root, of course, comes down to the why. Why do we as Christians strive for extremely temporal things and call them Jesus? As a people group, we are currently defined by the modern world as unloving and unwilling to gain a better understanding of any individual who is not already a Christian. These characteristics have absolutely nothing to do with Jesus. They are petty and selfish. They are Christianish, and yet they are our very own bad habits. Why? Don't we mean well? Don't we want to live for Christ, to share His love with those around us? Don't our mistakes stem from our frustration with the state of society, with what we perceive as the rebellion of modern mankind against the ideology of God? Actually, that is the core of the problem. The world is broken, completely broken. What we neglect to accept is that we are broken also. We each come from damaged goods and scandalous histories, and then pretend those negatives have no effect on us. The result equals a sea of followers of Jesus who can't properly see or hear Him beyond the chaos of our own lives. So instead of following Him, we say we are following Him, while actually following a combination of Him and our own chaos. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but most of the time it is a mixture of the two. Just enough of God to make a difference, just enough of ourselves to leave a questionable aftertaste. So the world sees that God is real, but at the same time something doesn't quite sit well with them about Him. What is the negative common denominator? The navel gazing. We are supposed to act as if everything is perfect, but deep down we know nothing quite is. So a silent, desperate prayer is also a stare. A constant internal eyeball on the broken shards of ourselves. Deep down most of us feel unglued in pieces, longing for our Christian zealousness to turn to superglue. We feel that if we do just enough, act out the right formula, all the pieces will melt and coagulate like Robert Patrick in Terminator 2. Ecclesiocopera, that we will not only become whole but indestructible. So we wall up our compassion and act shatterproof to a world at large while inside we are falling to pieces. And we believe this reveals Jesus. The great news is that Jesus looks down on us with the same tender compassion that he has for the rest of the world. He sees our pain, he sees our scandal, he knows what we are desperately trying to do, and he wants us to succeed. But there is a realization that we must first accept. We will never become indestructible by staring at our pieces. We are not supposed to become indestructible, untouchable, safe, and we aren't supposed to be staring at our own pieces at all. Because when we stare at our own pieces, we cannot see the solution. We only find the solution when we stare instead into the eyes of Christ, and in those eyes see the reflection of the hurting world. We know this, but every gut instinct tells us to shout out, I can't. How can I help a hurting world when I can't even figure out how to glue back the broken pieces that make up my life? This is when Jesus changes our perspective. This is when he says softly, you are not pieces, you are not my piece. You are not pieces, you are my piece. The Christianish approach is to see our lives as irreparable shards, always striving for the glue, but that pursuit is fruitless, because God did not put your glue in you. He did, however, make you the glue for someone else. Our lives are not shattered pieces. This whole world is a broken puzzle, and each of us fits next to those around us. You are the glue. And he compares that to Lost, the TV show Lost. In God's great plan, he created us each the same way. We can have our own brokenness, and we can each have a God-given strength. However, we continue to sit in confusion because we feel like a life following Jesus should feel less disjointed and make more, sense. And that is exactly the problem. Our lives don't make sense because our lives were not intended to stand alone. Our lives were each made by God as pieces of the eternal puzzle. We are made to fit our lives into one another's, our entire lives, the good, the bad, the strength, and the rough stuff. As hopeful as we are that our strength will heal someone else, it is far more likely that our rough stuff will. Because not only does our rough stuff hit another life where it most matters, the acknowledgement of our own rough stuff communicates that we understand this life we live and this world we live in. Embracing the reality of our rough stuff communicates truth. Truth that the world is able to identify. Truth that will become the glue to their pieces. This is the profound orchestration of God intended to use imperfect people to represent a perfect God. God's intention was never for each of us to fake our way to an appearance of flawlessness. His intention was for each of us to become true and vulnerable in our pursuit of Christ, while taking the glue of his power, even amidst the frailty of our humanness, to connect with the broken around us. It is this weave, this interlocked puzzle, this merging of shrapnel and adhesive into a beautiful picture. It is this that reveals the real truth of Jesus Christ. If we are ever to escape the Christianish and truly become little Christ, it will only be in this merging, acknowledging that our strengths are from God and not our own, while allowing that strength to mend the broken. But it does not stop there. We also have to be willing to reveal our pieces so that other strengths can heal our own pain. This is a perfect earthly picture of Christ. It requires a new sort of church culture, a culture that no longer positions itself at the prettiest angle, but rather gets down to the scandalous histories for the sake of revealing to a world at large that Christ not only understands, but can transform our pieces through the power of other broken people. Just like the rest of the world, the author's sons, Jackson and Charlie, fit together. They are simultaneously each other's antithesis and each other's antidote, each other's miracles or each other's foils, each other's miracle or each other's foil. It all depends upon whether or not they are willing to fit together and allow the collision of the rough stuff and strength, the scandals and successes, to make the sum of both entirely complete. Option A, breaking pieces of the puzzle, or option B, all the pieces we all become one piece, helping others who are broken to become that one piece. Option B. So we see Christianity as this puzzle, all these various pieces jumbled about, right? People telling us, oh, that's the right pieces, they sort of fit together, this is how they fit together, right, in the puzzle. But when you look at it, it's like a picture, the final picture, as you see on a box of a normal jigsaw puzzle, is incorrect. The pieces all fit together, seem to fit together. We force them to fit together, and they give you this illusionary picture. Okay. But if you're awake to it, you can see, hey, that picture doesn't match the box. Okay. So you've got to pull apart those pieces and you put them together in the right order. It's like a yarn of wool in knots. You would have to undo all the knots and the tangles, etc., to produce a beautiful sweater. This therefore ends this video, part 1 of this video. If you enjoyed it, give us a like, add your comments below this video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and then go share this video with your family, friends, neighbours, church friends, Jewish friends, Islamic friends, etc., to show them that we're all living a Christianish life. We're faking it until we make it, and this is the solution to stop that Christianishness and truly live for Christ in every sense of the word, and become a Christian, a real Christian, a true Christian, not a fake copy or wannabe, but the real deal.